Hello and welcome to this Junior's Gasoline Alley, where today we are solving for a highly unsafe condition on my 2004 Chrysler Crossfire. And what that condition is, well, a spring perch that had been cracked off of my car and snot welded back on by somebody who just clearly didn't know what they were doing. So in this video, we're going to go into what I found and how I fixed it with the help of a friend and a welder. Without any further ado, let's get this Chrysler Crossfire safe to operate on the road. As many of you may already know, the Chrysler Crossfire is based off of the first generation Mercedes-Benz SLK, and that chassis, also known as the R170, uses a much older design front suspension than what you see on most cars these days, like a McPherson strut or a double wishbone suspension. Instead, it used a 3-link strut-type front suspension. This 3-link suspension means that the spring and the strut are divorced from each other. So unlike other cars that have the spring on top of the strut, they are divorced, which means that the spring itself connects to the lower control arm and then on top to a spring perch, which is welded onto the chassis of the car. Unfortunately, on those R170 Mercedes, the spring perch itself, the way it was welded on, gave room to be able to have salt and just road debris ingress into where it mounts to the body. Ultimately, that means that they've had some rusting issues, and failure comes along with rust and the weakened connection, which means that they would crack off and come off, making the front end no longer have a spring to hold it up in a super dangerous situation. Well, unfortunately, when I got this Chrysler Crossfire home, I very quickly learned that that situation, well, that was something my car had. On the passenger side, the spring perch itself had clearly cracked off of the body. I don't know if it was from rust or from an accident. It did look like it had some paintwork on that side of the car. So in any case, it had been cracked off and then re-welded with clearly somebody who just doesn't know what they're doing. They kind of sort of bent it back into place, added some extra metal, and really made a disgusting job out of it. So I've got to get that fixed because I don't feel safe driving in it, especially since I want to lower this, get it on some better suspension anyways. And to be able to do that, I'm going to need to cut off the old spring perch, get a new one welded on, which surprisingly is really easy to come across. So I was able to buy one online, but the trouble came in, who and how was I going to get this welded on? I looked at a few different options. Body shops were going to charge a ton, and how do I really know they're going to do a better job than whatever idiot welded the original one back together? I also then looked at taking my car down to my friend, who happens to be a pretty good welder and has the skills to be able to make this happen. That I wanted to do, but the whole front suspension, taking it apart, takes a fair amount of work to be able to get done. And I wanted to be able to tackle that before going down there. So what I went ahead and did is I pulled off the springs off of the front. I pulled the one off of the left-hand side too, just in case we got excited and wanted to do the driver's side as well. And then I used some pipe clamps to clamp the old struts, which I'm not going to use again, up to hold the body up just enough to be able to tow it down. So I got the Crossfire loaded up onto the U-Haul trailer, towed it down to my friend's place, and we started digging in by taking some angle measurements and positioning measurements from both the driver's side as our known correct position and the passenger side. We did notice that the spring perch, how it had been repaired, was not quite matching what we saw on the driver's side, so we took some notes and began the project of cutting it off. Now, while we were using the cutoff wheel to get the old spring perch off, it became really evident that a lot of the weld that was done was not even connecting to the frame of the car. So this was just a nightmare waiting to happen, and a real good call to be tackling it. Once the spring perch was finally off and out of the way, it really came down to using the flap disc and cleaning up the underbody coating material off of the frame, so that way we would be able to have clean metal to weld up to. Once the chassis was clean, it was evident we needed to do a little bit of patchwork and bracing before putting the spring perch on, because the chassis itself had some rust through, and we wanted to make sure the spring perch went on and had no chance of coming off. So a couple of small patches put onto the chassis, and then it was attaching the spring perch. For this, we went ahead and used our measurements from before and from the driver's side to get it in the correct position, get it matching up to the driver's side more than the faulty repair ever was, and began the process of welding it back onto the frame. Now this, I'll hand it to my friend for all of his time and effort to get it done properly, but the outcome is a spring perch that went on really nicely. Now, albeit this took a ton of time, so we ended up deciding not to replace the driver's side, not fix what wasn't broken, and we clamped the struts, put everything back together, and back onto the trailer it went. That's how I repaired the spring perch that was failing and would have failed had I not done anything. And if you go ahead and hit subscribe and follow the channel, in the next video on this Chrysler Crossfire, we're going to be putting on some springs and shocks to really up the handling and take full advantage of this newly corrected spring perch problem. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave me some comments down below. Let me know what your thoughts are, and consider subscribing so you can see more videos like this to check out as well.